Right, hello everybody, and welcome to our new home. We just moved here less than 2 months ago, so we're kind of still getting used to this space, etc. So a few words about Reaktor, if you're not familiar with us. We are a hybrid partner for forward-looking companies and businesses. We have 6 offices on 3 different continents. We have 450 people spread between these offices. Helsinki and New York being the biggest one, and Amsterdam probably growing the fastest. We have exceptional ability to scale and take on projects of any caliber. We have a Nordic touch, we have global reach, boutique approach. I think nowadays we like to say that we go from high level to hands-on. We have one foot in the future. We make things and we make things happen. We are obsessed with solving complex problems, but we are always unconditionally human when we do it. And we are changing how the world works by example. So that's kind of Reaktor in very, very short. If you have any more questions, just feel free to ask afterwards from any of us who are present here. So let's hop on into the topic of tonight's presentation, which is being different. So my name is Timo Ilola. My background is in digital design originally. I started in '99 at Frantic, one of the first pioneering digital design companies here in Finland. But then I went to branding and identity design for most of my career. So I was working on different brands, doing designs, before I then decided to come back, make a full circle and come back to digital design 3 years ago when I joined Reaktor. So I've been looking at design from a little bit different perspectives along the way. So from that perspective, I just want to ask, what does it actually mean to be different? And I want to kind of make a brand analog here. So in a way, brands are like people. They have their own quirks and personalities. So let's take an example. I'm sure that you're all familiar with this metaphor of design being an empty glass, a vessel that will only show what the content is inside. It's purely functional, purely kind of a container for your content. I love the example of scented candles. Scented candles are like extremely commoditized product. They're pretty cheap to produce. They can cost like few euros a bulk. I'm probably pretty sure that this doesn't cost a lot. But then when you look at the variety of different candles that you can have, it's kind of purely a brand play. All these candles cost more or less the same to make. Maybe this one costs a little bit more due to the elaborate container, but still, it's the brand value that you're adding to these products. The same is, so it's kind of a single use case. You just want to have your scent and your candlelight in the space. The same can be said of soaps, expensive soaps. I love this area as well, as it's kind of like a huge variety of different products that you can have in the soap scene. And again, it's very commoditized product. It's a brand play. It's kind of giving different personalities and aspect to a commoditized product. The same happens in all consumer product categories. If you come closer to the digital field, I like the fact that you have these AIs and AI assistants. So basically, Amazon, Google, Apple all have their own assistants, which are basically the same product. It's just a brand play. You kind of give a different flavor to that functional aspect of the product. So branding is, in my mind, kind of about accentuating differences. It's finding differences and then accentuating, making them larger. And there are, of course, real differences between products, usually. I just chose some examples where it's a pure brand play. So let's look at what's happening in digital field. I'm sure that you're all familiar with this kind of marketing site aesthetic, where you have a lot of white space, you have your humanist typeface title, you have your sans serif modernist one here, you have your humanist illustration, a lot of white space, one CTA color, etc., etc. But then when you look at what's happening on marketing sites overall, it's not really an ownable aesthetic. If this looks familiar, it's because I got this slide from Tobias von Schneider. He tweeted this last summer. I love the fact that these are marketing sites, because this is where the brand should really shine. It's all marketing. When you go to the product, when you try to cram it on a wearable or on a small screen, it's much, much harder to differentiate with the brand. So here, this should be like the prime spot where you can build a difference before you kind of dive into the functional product that has all its limitations. I think the same happens with, well, this is kind of an extreme example. Same happens with like this color blue. Like a lot of startups go color blue. Here's color blue and a curve, 2 curves. Maybe you go back to this illustration. And I love this. This looks great. It's just not like a very ownable aesthetic. And it's not like anybody's fault. Probably these clients are asking for it. Hey, let's make a design like this. Hey, can we do it like this? And you kind of want to fit in the startup mold. So it's kind of a natural direction to gravitate towards. But I think it's pretty clear that trends have gone global, right? Everybody's kind of following the same references. You want to be thin, type-wise. Or if you're following Apple, the medium is the new thin. You want to do your white space and illustrations and light gray tones. Maybe you're playing around with cards and drop shadows, card systems. So everybody's kind of following Dribble and taking their references and benchmarks, etc., etc., etc. And this just has gone global. And of course, it's not limited to digital design. It's kind of a global trend on all design fronts. And product-wise, you can get an avocado toast in each hipster coffee in every country around the world. You can go to Tokyo and get the same kind of avocado toast that you would get in Brooklyn, New York. So it's kind of a global phenomenon. We used, when I was in my previous job at Kokura Moi Design Agency, we used to look at Japan. And they would have their unique own visual culture. That was great. We ordered books from Japan. One would arrive every year, and we would look at that. But sadly, we could see the Western influence also creeping in that direction as well. My point is that unless you're like an extremely trendy brand, you shouldn't be following trends that much. If you're Yeezy, you have to be on brand. You have to be on trend, actually. So the whole brand is built around being super trendy and being in the know about what's happening next. If you're a Lloyd's shoe, it's not that relevant to follow the trends. I think you should be yourself. You should be different. So I think we're kind of building this our own sandbox for digital design. A lot of designers are kind of self-limiting them to self. There's a lot of reasons for this, but we're kind of a little bit self-limiting into this one sandbox when there was kind of a whole theme park out there that we could be investigating. And of course you say, well, there's these functional requirements. We're building actual functioning digital services and products that need to work and they need to provide value to the user. Who cares about branding? And it is true, cramming all this stuff on this small screen, it's like super hard. It's hard to design for this stuff. And the smaller the screen gets, the harder it is. So why does it matter that everything is getting uniform? I think this is kind of the most quoted design principles probably ever, like Dieter Rams' 10 principles of good design. People have been quoting this to me as well, like, it doesn't matter about the brand, we just go with the functional stuff, and that's where the beauty lies. So good design is as little design as possible. The thing is that there's only one Braun. We have to be somebody else. We can't everybody be Braun. We have to kind of differentiate on some level. Otherwise, there's no point. So if this is like an imaginary axis, I just put something here for the illustration purposes. So it says conservative here at the bottom, innovator at the top. We go from minimal to expressive. It's just like for illustration purposes. So let's say that Braun nowadays is not very innovator, it's not very minimal. If you take Samsung home appliances as well, you could say that they're like a little bit more innovative. They're pushing for the mobile phone things. They have edge screens, etc. on their phones. If you go Dyson, they're trying to kind of push innovation, primarily by putting a hole in the middle of their products. So that's kind of trying to find a new way of designing home appliances. Google is kind of innovating in home. They're copying a lot Alexa, but still, in comparison to these brands, they're like hugely innovative. If you take Alessi, which is kind of an odd choice, but still, they're probably not very innovative, but they are expressive as hell. They have this kind of weird bottle openers with faces, etc., and they're kind of really playing around. So I'm kind of missing this variety in the digital presences of all these brands. Why does digital has to be so uniform? Couldn't it be more reflecting of these brands? But it is difficult to stand out in the digital sphere. There's the startup aesthetics. Everybody wants to look like a startup. And the craft level in these templates that you can get for free is really good. You have to be a really good designer to make a better website than these freely available assets. So I think it's kind of tough competition. There's a lot of systems that dominate all of design. You have your material design systems, which is kind of constricting. They have their own guidelines for how to incorporate brands, but still it's always material design. You have your 8-point grid systems, all kinds of systems that you have to kind of learn and know how to use, which are they're kind of making it easier and faster to deliver design, but still they're making stuff more uniform along the way. And the craft is really hard. So I think there's kind of a barrier to entry for a lot of designers to digital field, because it really takes a lot of effort just to be up to date with how you design nowadays for digital devices, what kind of systems you should use, how do you build a visual design language, for example. So you kind of have to keep learning these tools and put a lot of effort into that. I had a nice kind of realization around this theme of craft and creativity while I was judging Art Directors Club Europe competition a few years ago in Barcelona. So this is a competition of national competitions. All the work that is here present has already been awarded silver or gold in these national competitions. And then all this silver and gold awarded work is sent to this one room. There's also digital design. It's all the categories in the same, with the same jury. Then all of this kind of work is there for you to judge. So the craft level is really, really good. You only have good craft, you only have good work there present. But I think in the end, creativity kind of shines through. So some work just kind of pop out of this mass. And I think that's the interesting thing about craft and creativity. So the way I think about design in general, and if you look at digital design, there's a huge amount of craft that's needed. It takes a lot of effort to learn that craft. And you can get good design done just knowing well the craft and kind of executing well and doing it well. But then if you want to stand out, I think you need creative ideas, creative concept, creativity, and then you can do kind of differentiated, ownable designs that really stand out of the mass. Then I think in all design there's this perseverance, just going at it, really pushing for it, believing in your ideas, and then when they don't work, finding the next idea and just try and keep the bar high. And that's kind of how you do award-winning work or whatever kind of recognition you want. And I think if you go to print design, this craft is probably much lower. So I think that's kind of sometimes why craft and creativity get mixed up in digital design. So, how can you be different? I'll let you read the quote here. So I have three steps, three categories that I put together for being different. This is not exactly how to do it, but it's just more collected thoughts. So first of all, I think you need to differentiate on all levels of product. And I'm going to use a cliched example here because I'm such a fanboy, but I think you have to identify where you can really make a difference. So it's kind of looking at the whole pipeline of your product and find a place to make a difference. So it's kind of a relay run for me. So you're kind of running in competition. They're always passing the baton. Maybe it's to the next team that's going to work on the design after you guys have been working on strategy. Maybe it's passing the baton to yourself. You're kind of always going forward with the design. And I think the previous phase can give you a good head start into building a great design. Or it can be kind of not so valuable to the overall effort. So I think when you're doing strategy, you're doing product design, you're doing branding, UX, visual, motion design. Each and every of these categories is an opportunity to kind of differentiate and push for something great. Even though you would have a poor strategy, you can still do some work here in visual design to try to differentiate yourself. It's going to be hard, but you can try it. if you have a great strategy, you have a great head start. So now I'm going to use Tesla as an example. I'm sure that you're all familiar with Elon Musk's Tesla. So he has the grand plan. Build a roadster like a luxury car, make money for building a sedan, a more commoditized car, and make money with that to make a mass market car. While you're at it, find ways to produce renewable energy and build a station, kind of infrastructure to charge your cars. So I think this is already like a great strategy. You get a nice head start with this strategy. It gets you on a solid, good foundation. Then you have your own proprietary product. They've been developing this battery technology for years, and they're really good at it. So you get this kind of technological product advantage as well. Yeah, no worries. They work on drivetrains, etc., etc. So now you could be like, okay, we made this kick-ass electric car. Let's just leave it at that, you know. And it's enough that it's electric. It's really cool. That's it. But still, they have manufacturing capabilities. I think their design, when they actually start building the car, giving it form, they hired the head designer of Mazda to really push the design language and kind of build a coherent design language around Tesla. And then I love the kind of symbol here in the new Model 3 dashboard, which is kind of having this technology at the core of the brand experience, just getting rid of all the different buttons, etc. I think this could be a leaf out of brand strategy guidelines that says like technology is a key driver for us, and then you put this screen here. But I think it's a bold, strong statement that really makes a difference and makes this product differentiated from everything else. And then you have all these other things that Musk is building that work or don't work. I don't know how to close this one myself, but still, I think it's kind of something that you get press out of, so it kind of sticks in your mind. So I think Tesla is working on a lot of different levels. I'm not familiar enough with the touchscreens to say whether the motion side is kind of really like differentiated, but they have like a really good palette of different differentiating factors in the product. Now, I've been really kind of intrigued with this first principles thinking that Musk has been pushing. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of taking apart an idea and going back to the fundamentals of, he's saying physics. I think that's not applicable probably to kind of digital design. But I've been kind of a little bit doing this myself in the sense that let's take color red. And this comes more from identity side. When I was doing branding more, a lot of people have told me that you can't use color red. It's like aggressive, and you can't do like you have to go blue. You have to do more neutral tones. This is kind of calling too much for attention. And then you have one of the biggest telcos, and they are red. They have even Santander, which is a huge bank. It's all about security and all kinds of good things, and they are red. So I think that kind of proves the point. So in a way, I feel that a lot of people have a lot of kind of preset ideas in their mind, and sometimes you just have to kind of break them down and see whether this actually makes sense, whether we have to go down to the fundamentals and see if that's actually true or not. So in a way, my takeaway from this is that competitors should be differentiated. Tesla is really nicely differentiating from the other cars. My second point is design strategically. Everything sounds better when you add strategic there. So I think you have to have mutually shared goal and mutually shared vision for the whole product team. Only trendy brands should follow trends. So you have to have your own vision. For me, this is kind of building your own sandbox. I'm coming back to this sandbox metaphor. Instead of letting the kind of overall trends define your sandbox, you should define your own sandbox. So maybe you want it to be white. Maybe you want to use water instead of sand. Maybe you don't want all these floating things, but you want like one big toy, you know? So you're kind of defining your own sandbox, your own living space, and moving inside that. So I think you should have concrete goals for design based on user, business, and brand needs. All of those trees. If nobody's defining them for you, you can define them yourself and propose it to the client. I've done this, and the client was really happy about it. In a way, I think all of us designers should be brand ambassadors. Even though you have haven't designed the brand, or you have designed the brand, we should be kind of the people who are like, hey, the brand is about this. This is like how it should behave, and kind of really internalizing the brand, I think is kind of important for us. There's not a lot of people in corporations think about brands apart from the brand directors, etc. But like in your day-to-day operations, probably you are the one who should be kind of doing that as well. Design principles and drivers is kind of, I think this is kind of a mixed bag. Some people don't like them. I do like them, but you have to make them work for you. I think it's a nice way of kind of collecting and solidifying your thinking, but they should make you do real concrete things. They should be meaningful to you, and they should really guide your design work. For example, these principles that are from a real project that we did, I think at some point we benchmarked to these and we realized, oh, hey, we're not following this. I think this and this and this screen is not kind of actually following this. We have to change it. And we changed the design due to the principles, and we changed it for the better. I think the end result was better for it. So nowadays, I've been kind of, this looks like crap. It's like a real board, but kind of just putting the stuff out on the wall as a team has been a great tool for me. It doesn't matter that you have your brand guidelines somewhere tucked in a PDF. You have your strategy defined somewhere. You have your consumer behaviors probably defined in another deck. But just kind of digging it out, putting it on the wall together defining how is this going to work. What are the design drivers? Here we are going to content strategy based on this work here. Then you kind of divide the content strategy into kind of layout mockups, different kind of mockups for different visuals. This is kind of, at least for me, a very nice way of working. So I think it's kind of a little bit like probably writing novellas. I've never done it myself, but I guess it's kind of like writing a character. You start with the outward mannerisms. This is what this person always does when confronted with this kind of a problem, etc. But then you internalize the character at some point. So you kind of start pushing the boundaries. This is your kind of playground, but what happens when you start to stretch it this way or that way? I think that kind of keeps the thinking fresh as well. You kind of try to see how far does this system bend. So I think differentiate brands should feel different. That's my point here. And then my last, third, and this is kind of being about being memorable. If you use a service, if you use a product, I think it should stick with you. You should have some kind of a memory image of that service. And in a way, products should be as visible as they need to be. It doesn't mean that it has to have all the whiz and bangles. It has to be like difficult to use product, but they should be sometimes so visible that you actually remember using them. This is Dan Jaffer from Jawbone. For me, what's worked in design, and I'm talking like in design in general, is the idea of a gesture. And I'm not talking like a physical gesture or touch screens or anything. It's just this kind of idea of a concept or gesture that you make, one primary idea for design that's remembered and understood. And you kind of remember that product or service by that gesture. Then you can have supporting gestures, but they should always help build out that primary gesture, not kind of overcrowded. Now, like a very clear example in branding is this. It's much easier in branding. We did Fazer Cafe, so we use like big letters. You remember Fazer Cafe with big letters. They're taken from original cafe sign that's on the original historic Fazer Cafe first location. So there's like a clear connection to history, and this is kind of visual gesture. Now in functioning things, it's much harder to come up with these kind of gestures. This is an obvious example, of course. You could see somebody saying, okay, let's have this device and find out an innovative way to interact it. And it quite well worked, I think. It's kind of, you remember this device by that. An example closer to home is, I don't know if anybody remembers Use Send It. I used to send this way back when, for sending big files. This was before I used Dropbox or anything. So it was like really, really useful, but it looks like crap. And then came along WeTransfer. And this is the first time I saw this round progress bar that's everywhere nowadays. But it just kind of really stuck with me. And the simplicity of this user interface of the previous one was a huge, huge improvement. I just immediately started using WeTransfer. So I think that's kind of like an extreme example. But in a way, if you have these kind of experiences, gestures, whatever they are, I think they should provide the user value. They should provide the business some value. And they should also provide the brand value. So if you can hit this sweet spot, sometimes people think that, okay, I'm adding some brand value here. It has to be non-functional. It has to be kind of bad. It's going to distract me from usability. But I think that you can build this kind of experiences that are at the core of the product and work on all these levels. Tinder is the obvious example, of course. The swiping, everybody knows that. So it's kind of, the whole product is built around that. I think Pivo did a nice work with this kind of timeline when they initially released the app. Probably you guys are familiar with the Netflix by Gretchen. So this is kind of a branding effort, but they built this unified system around cards. And even though I was kind of laughing at cards, I think they took this so far that it kind of turned into this kind of immediately recognizable gesture. And they can use it everywhere. It's kind of really holistic approach. So you can combine it with video, you can use it on product. It's kind of visually stunning and really good looking. So when I saw this, I was like, aha, this is how you do digital branding. And it's scalable. We were tackling the same kind of problem with HBO back when I was working with that. So how do you feature the franchises and how do you differentiate between the Netflix brand? So it's beautifully resolved here. It works in print, it works in digital, it works in outdoor advertising. Beautiful system. Of course, this system is not in place in the product as you see it here, which is that's a topic for a different talk, but I think there's kind of this gap between the brand experience that these brand agencies are designing, what product agencies are kind of implementing in the product. So it's really hard for an outsider to design a system that would then be kind of implemented into a digital product. There's a lot of reasons for that. Another thing that I love is this Metro UI. I think it's beautiful, and it started this kind of flat design aesthetic on many ways. And also, if you look at Wolf Ollins, the work that Wolf Ollins did, they could take that into identity, really make the aesthetics kind of shine and turn into this kind of graphic element kind of thing that you can use on commercial and everything. So it's kind of like a holistic approach that goes way down into the product and then comes back out, and it really works. Of course, now we have a lot of different new options coming for interaction. So you have the speech interaction, etc. I think there's a lot of good articles around this, how to make speech applications kind of branded and working. So experiences should be memorable. That's my takeaway from this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go show one case example and wrap this up. So I want to talk a little bit about the Finnair case, which is probably familiar to a lot of you guys. This is work from Reaktor from the past years. We were asked to design the mobile application in the beginning, and then we started building services around that. But I love the fact how this kind of comes from the Finnair strategy and how everything kind of ties together. The brand communicates individual peace of mind, personalized service, easiness, and the freshness of the experience. The customer experience that we're aiming for was peace of mind. And it should be a powerful reason for choosing Finnair. So I think with this strategy, you already get a head start. Somebody has thought this out, it's good, they really want to focus on customer experience. What do we do around that? So what we did is we kind of really focused on the overall customer experience, not just the flight, but what's the journey the passenger takes from pre-flight, going to the airport, boarding the plane, maybe changing, transferring planes, and then when you arrive to the destination, what's the overall user journey? And really trying to make that as smooth as possible. So two of our designers were working on this UI for a long time. I don't remember how many iterations Vesa did out of this, but I think it was kind of trying to figure out how to represent visually and in UI-wise this time lapse, this kind of user journey. I think he did like 30 iterations or whatever of this. And then it turned out into this kind of hand-drawn sketches of the user experience. So I think here you can already start seeing shape of, okay, we had the whole customer experience here visualized. When you add the visual graphics to it, it really comes to life. And this is not a gimmick. It's at the heart of the service. It actually speaks to the brand strategy. It's an ownable visual aesthetic. It's completely different from what other people are doing, from what other companies are doing. It's actually functional. I would call it signature experience. Somebody uses the term. And there's other functionalities as well. Everything has been designed to help you along the way. So I think 60% of most frequent flyers use this application, and 25% of new frequent flyers join through the app. And the beauty of the concept is that it kind of scales. So you can take to the IFE, in-flight entertainment systems as well. The only difference is that you can't use white background. So I think Kim, the designer working on this, came up with the idea of using clouds and skies. So that kind of ties in nicely with Finnair brand as well. So you get this more muted, kind of peaceful cabin aesthetic. But here you can see also the same idea. It's what's happening now and what's happening next. You always need to know what's happening during your flight. You're kind of given clear dates and times. It's like really clean, nice and modern. Implementing this for airplanes is not easy. So we had like a huge kind of effort around how to kind of do this with not so modern equipment, but I think it's a testament to the team that they got it done. And since then, the Finnair services have grown into a whole ecosystem of different services. So I'll leave you guys with this thought. All right, thank you.
About being different, we saw a lot of those sort of standard startup websites, and the actual benefit of that one is to actually that everybody knows how it works.
Yeah.
So where do you draw the line between the sort of familiarity of a service that you can know exactly what the service does when you click the call to action, and sort of being a different? Do you have any sort of rules that, okay, how much you know?
I think that's like a really good question, and I think you should always know how it works. I think then you're kind of being different in the wrong way if you don't know how that actually works. And I think that startup example is a nice example also for the reasons that I think startups need to kind of fit the mold a little bit, like they want to appear to VCs, etc., in a certain way, so that people know that they are in the know, they get it. So it's kind of more of a bigger business strategy that they want to kind of fit inside this bubble. But I think that's the beauty of it, like when you kind of understand where you're trying to fit and then try to push out of it. And I'm not saying that we're gonna make it incomprehensible. You had it in 01, you had these weird sites that were like tests. That's not what I'm meaning at all. I'm just saying that, okay, this is like the playing field. Let's see which way we can kind of stretch it and where we can push and where can we be more original. But I think that's the thing, that you have to be useful, you have to have create business value, and you have to create brand value. So all of those have to come together. If you're not being useful to the user, then it's not a good service.
Hi, thanks. I'd like to kind of get a crisp example on differentiation versus difference by design. I'm startup founder myself. I struggle. Where do I fit? I mean, sometimes when I pitch, usually I try to pitch for a startup, means maybe pitch for values. There exists, people understand when I say Uber. When something new comes by maybe creating new values, how to align the pitch in a way that something new is also different?
Yeah, so I think like kind of there's several kind of convoluted things inside that. So I think there's one thing is the pitching. So you have to have your elevator pitch. You have to be able to describe it in 30 seconds. And I've been mentoring like some startups, some of our portfolio companies in Startup Sauna on their kind of brand identities. So I can see where you're coming from. So you kind of want to be able to describe, oh, we are the Uber for this, or we are this or that. And very rarely are you like something completely new. And that's kind of, I think fine. At least when you kind of start digging deeper in, then you might find more differences. So I think it's kind of, you have to differentiate in some way. I think for very early stage startups, truthfully, this is like not so important. I think what really matters is that if you have a great idea, usually you need to be second time founder. If you've done an exit, that's great. You know, it's much easier to get funding. And I think the visual identity and all of the kind of branding that you are doing, I call them like brand deck identities. So it kind of basically needs to convey the idea in an efficient manner. You can just pick a nice typeface, pick a color, and tell your story. And I think that's fine when you're kind of looking for a seed funding round. Then when you progress a little bit further, when you're trying to raise a Series A or even Series B, I think then you should kind of build on top of that, and then you kind of really need to differentiate. And I think if you look at, for example, Twitter, Facebook, all these like big giants, they were kind of not very pro in the beginning, and they did fine, you know. And if you look at Airbnb, they just rebranded like a few years ago. So I think there comes a moment in a company's life when the rebranding is more important. So speaking with different founders, I think some, and if they've done like first exit, for example, I think second timers around, they put quite a lot of effort initially, even before launching, into branding. I've spoken with some people who really believe that, hey, your first deck, it has to look great, it has to be differentiated, you have to kind of really polish that. So if you had the resources to do that, then that's great. But I think it's not the most important thing. The most important thing for a startup is to look kind of believable enough to raise your funding. You know, you have to go lean and mean.
Hey Timo, great stuff. Yeah, I was just kind of spitballing in my head about this situation, which I've seen a little bit, where like, you know, you find your market and you kind of maybe even see a bit ahead of the curve, unintentionally even. You kind of like figure out how to differentiate and you start building toward there. I think a good example right now is like brutalism in design, and then you suddenly notice that, hey, there's all these people coming into your space, and sure, they're like trendy companies, for example, they'll move on later, but what do you do once, you know, it's kind of like you were there a little ahead, now everyone's there, so you're not that different anymore. You know, do you stick to your guns? Do you know, and then risk looking blasé or outdated once they move on?
I think it's kind of, from my perspective, I think it should be kind of lean and iterative approach, in the sense that you have to always keep pushing forward, you know. Well, if you look at Apple, I think that's like an easy example. Every phone that they publish, even though the phone might be quite similar, but they always try to outdo themselves when they're doing kind of their marketing sites, etc. So I think you kind of always have to be pushing forward. And the thing with trying to be kind of the coolest kid in the block is that people start following you. So you just have to run faster, I think. You just have to kind of like outrun them. And I think you have a head start if you have kind of found a new way. So maybe you have to make sure that you take it up to the next level and next level and next level. And I think that comes down to business strategy as well. You know, if it's like very low barrier to entry into what you're doing, then you kind of have to keep raising the bar all the time.
Thanks.